What's up, Rutgers? I'm Stephen Weiss. I'm the opinions editor here at the Daily Targum. You're watching the first after the edit. So what's going to happen in this new video series is we're going to be inviting people from the Rutgers community to come here to the newsroom and discuss the most pressing issues that the Rutgers community faces. And these discussions are going to be based off of editorials that are published by the Daily Targum. So here we have three of our first guests, and these guys are all Targum columnists. That won't be the case for every video, but I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves. Connor, you want to start?
Yeah, my name's Connor O'Brien. I'm a senior majoring in economics, and I write a column every other Thursday called Taming Tribalism.
I'm Priyanka. I'm a junior studying journalism and business, and I used to write a column dealing with women's issues.
I'm Robert. I'm a junior. I'm a history and political science major, and I write a bi-weekly column called The Daily Rhino about politics, and I'm also the chairman of the Rutgers College Republicans.
So, as I said before, these videos are going to focus on editorials that we've published before. Today's focus is going to be on an editorial that was published on September 12th. The editorial was based around free speech in terms of professors. So what professors should or shouldn't say in a class. And where we got the idea for this editorial was one of the editors brought it up to me, and they said they saw a post in a Rutgers Class of 2020 Facebook page where a student said the following: "I just dropped the first class I've ever dropped in my college life. Why? Because the first effing 10 minutes of a course should not be about Trump and liberal agenda. This is the 7th course I've had with a super biased liberal professor, and I'm sick of it." And then he finished with, "I'm not even an effing conservative." Okay, so this was interesting because this post got, like, in the first day, it got over 200 likes, 50 or more comments. We checked this morning, and it was like 263 or so comments, or likes, and over 50 comments. So I want to ask you guys first, have you ever personally experienced this on any side of the spectrum with a professor, liberal, conservative, whatever, or know anybody who has?
Well, I certainly had I've had several, professors who are clearly liberal. I haven't had any professor who is particularly bad where it would make me want to drop a course. I think it's kind of, and the studies, bear this out, most college professors are liberal, and that's not necessarily a problem. And I think the editorial might have missed this point where it's not necessarily that a professor can't share their political opinions. Where it becomes bad is if they make it seem that that's the only correct opinion, and you won't be able to get a good grade unless you believe this opinion. A professor can share their opinions and encourage debate, and I think that's good, especially in liberal arts courses where you want to encourage debate.
Yeah, I think I definitely had professors that do kind of express their opinions in classes, but it's mostly liberal. I think that's just because of the audience that we have at Rutgers and the type of demographics that we have in New Jersey especially. So most of my professors have been liberal and they've expressed those opinions.
Yeah, I mean, anyone being honest with you about discourse on campus is going to say that professors, especially in the social sciences, are overwhelmingly liberal. But I thought the Facebook post was pretty funny because I think people should just care a little bit less about whether their professor has a political opinion that diverges from their own. I think it's somewhat ironic because the conservative movement on college campuses is now so centered around the idea that liberals should get over their feelings and just learn to deal with opposing viewpoints. But now, they want us to deal with liberal biases from professors, and to them I say, get over it.
So I think it's one thing to say a professor who's teaching. It's okay. The answer is pretty easy when it comes to a professor who's teaching math, and they're talking about Trump for the first 20 minutes of class. You're wasting your students' time, obviously. I think the question becomes a lot more complicated when you start talking about political science professors or public policy professors, international relations professors, and I think it's more complex there. And also, I kind of want to, I think it's relevant to bring up Michael Chikindas and James Livingston to this discussion, because although they didn't express themselves inside of class, they expressed themselves outside of class in a way that might affect how their students feel. So just briefly, Michael Chikindas made multiple, he posted multiple anti-Semitic memes and Facebook posts on the internet. He's no longer allowed to teach required courses at Rutgers, which is very reasonable. A Jewish student should not have to take a class with Michael Chikindas. And then James Livingston, a little bit more complicated, it seems. He hasn't yet received a punishment, to my knowledge, but he posted also a racially charged Facebook post. And you guys might know about this, but do you have anything you want to say about like what professors should be limited to even outside of class?
I think it's a very tricky issue because on the one hand, I think a reasonable person would think if someone's a raging anti-Semite and they're posting terrible things on Facebook, it should be easy to fire them. And but it's tricky because we're a state school and there are certain First Amendment rights that come with that. The government can't say you can't say these things, but I think there has to be some line to draw. But I also am a little uncomfortable without knowing who's drawing the line and where they draw the line. I mean, it's easy. There are easy points like someone is a racist or an anti-Semite or in other way bigoted. I think there wouldn't be a lot of pushback. But then it gets into the question, what about there's a gray area, there's disagreement, so it's tricky. And I don't think I have the answer, but it's certainly difficult.
I mean, in some cases it's glaringly obvious, like the two you mentioned, that they were in the wrong and that students shouldn't have to deal with those kind of biases. But at the same time, how do you draw the line? If you're putting some sort of policy in writing, how do you make rules about what people can and cannot say? I mean, that's a really dangerous thing to do, especially when you consider the fact that, in practice it's going to be, a bureaucracy that's prone to groupthink that is going to be the one actually carrying out these policies. So, I mean, we can all sit here and agree about these easy cases, but then when it comes down to what the actual specific rules you're going to make about these, I think it's incredibly difficult, incredibly complicated.
And can I say, let me use this example to kind of illustrate that. There are like issues, very politically charged issues that it becomes difficult to tell. Like, I'm going to use this example, debates over Israel and Palestine, some accusations of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia get thrown around a lot in that debate, and where's the line where what is a legitimate geopolitical opinion and what's bigoted is extremely murky. And I don't know, like you said, I don't know if the bureaucracy is even equipped to figure it out. So, like I said, it's tricky.
I think that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that professors could express their like political views on like if they have like a Twitter or like a Facebook or whatever, but without like without being bigoted. I think it's pretty easy to express your political views without being bigoted. I think that as long as you're holding like a certain sense of professionalism, I think that would be okay.
Yeah, for all the criticism it gets, I think sometimes we lose sight of why tenure exists for professors. It's to protect people with controversial opinions, because you never know how an opinion that's extreme one day is eventually going to become something that shapes kind of the modern, the way we think now. So I think we should keep that in mind as well, especially when we're dealing with things that tenured professors are saying that can be controversial.
But at the same time, tenured professors might take that for granted and think that they are able to say whatever they want just because they're tenured, I guess. So that's also something to keep in mind.
I want to ask you guys, like, if there are any, what sort of parallels can we draw between the cases that were brought up about Michael Chikindas and James Livingston and professors who are like the one in the Facebook post who are extremely biased? Like, I'm just saying, I feel like students, it could have an effect on students in the sense that maybe they're uncomfortable expressing their views, and in a political science class, for example, a class discussion is extremely important, an objective class discussion. So, do you have anything to say about that?
I don't think it's a one-to-one parallel, because I think with the two cases you discussed, that's about firing, not firing, affecting the job. But the other one is more of a debate about education. What's the best way to educate students? And I, for one, I'm here, discussing my opinions to the whole world to see. So I'm obviously comfortable in doing that, and even disagreeing with professors. I do it sometimes agree with professors, but I've heard people who say, I don't want to talk. There are people who just don't want to talk in a class period, no matter what. And add on top of that, the professor has made it very clear that they disagree. I think it is a very real effect on learning in academics. So I think professors should take that into account and maybe consider what they're doing and saying before they do and say it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that a lot of times, like, this has happened to me personally, like, if a professor is saying something I don't agree with and everyone else in the class is agreeing with them, I would be too scared to, go against the grain and speak up and, in front of, 30 different people. But I think that if it relates to the course matter, if it's an economics class and you're talking about how, the current president's policies are affecting current economics, I think that that's, a whole different story, because that affects every single student individually, and whether or not it's, a positive or negative effect, I think that's okay for the professor to be, speaking about.
So, are there any other questions that you guys want to bring up about this? Anything else that popped into your mind?
I just want to make the point that when we're regarding professors in class, I think even if we decide, yes, this is a problem, which I think in some ways if you make a student feel uncomfortable, it is a problem, but I don't know how to solve it without potentially making a worse problem, because I think professors generally should be free to teach their class as they will, and I don't know if we're going to make a rule, it's going to have to be written down on paper, and that takes away all nuance in a classroom. So I'm not sure there's an easy fix here. I think it comes down to individual professors perhaps moderating, not even moderating their opinions, but moderating how they deal with dissent in their class. Me even going out of the way and promote it and saying, hey, you feel free to disagree with me. This is just my opinion, Yeah,
and I also think that there are certain classes where the professor taking a stance might actually be the way that class should be run. You can, certain classes based on racial issues and things like that. In some cases, it's very reasonable for a professor to take a stance there. I think for the most part, though, it might have a chilling effect on the discussions in at least politically leaning classes. Anything else you guys want to say?
Well, I would say that part of the college experience is learning to stick up for what you believe in and learning to express yourself coherently and forcefully. And so I think students shouldn't take their professor expressing their opinion as something to be upset about. They should take it as a challenge to, a challenge to meet in a way, and they should use that to make their own opinions more coherent.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You can also, as students, you learn how to, have, professional discourse with each other without, erupting into, really heavy arguments, because if you're forced to be in the same room with a bunch of people that don't agree with you, or your professor doesn't agree with you, then, you're going to have to learn how to speak to them normally.
And as long as it doesn't get into grading, on a question of opinion, not necessarily fact, you have to agree with me or my grade or your grades could go down. I think debate and dissent from the professors, I think that's good. And I think in some ways it could be fun. I know I look forward to classes more that when the professor lets us talk and debate more than just a professor at the front of the class droning on and on. But that's a personal thing. Some people don't want to talk in class. They would rather write or they'd rather do something else. So
I think in that sense, a professor, and I think you're exactly right when it comes to the grading situation. Obviously, if it has an effect on the student's grade, that professor's doing something wrong. But a professor taking a stance may be able to promote class discussion. And in that sense, political philosophers since Aristotle have been saying, and John Stuart Mill, there's no you can't make a serious conclusion about a certain issue without serious deliberation before that conclusion, right?
And it's great practice for the real world too. I mean, you're probably going to work in a company someday where almost everybody in the company thinks you should do something this way, and if you're in the minority and you have some great idea, you should speak up. And now that you're in college, it's great practice because the stakes are much lower. You don't have millions of dollars or clients on the line, so students should utilize this rather than let it get them down.
And also with a larger point about society, I think being able to disagree with someone and still like them or be friends with them is important. And at a time where we are, getting a little more partisan and people are very, worked up on whatever side of the aisle they are, I think we should all be able to have a discussion about politics and still at the end of the day, don't hate someone over it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I guess the only time it becomes like an issue is where like if it's like a math class or like if it's just a class where like your professor's opinion is like almost like wasting your time. That's like, I guess that's like where the Facebook post came from. Like if it's like an accounting class and you're talking about like Trump for like like a good hour of the class, that's probably like not what you're paying for.
I last semester I took a foreign policy class, so if my professor was saying his foreign policy opinions, it didn't bother me, but he would go multiple times during the year. He went on extended rants about gun control, and that just doesn't have any bearing on foreign policy. And he was a professor, and every professor has a different teaching style, but he didn't do a lot of discussion. He would talk for a while and then ask specific questions. So there wasn't any room for discussion. It was just him saying his opinions on a matter that he's not an expert at. He has a PhD in foreign relations, so his opinion on foreign affairs, he has an expert opinion. But, he's just a regular guy when it comes to guns. His opinion is no more valid than anyone else's.
Alright, so that's our first video, guys. If you want to let us know in the comments what you thought about our opinions, if you loved our opinions, if you hated our opinions, tell us why. Also, if you feel strongly about any editorials in the future that come up, please send me an email at op-ed@dailytargum.com. Maybe we'll have a video about it, and maybe you'll be on the video. So, we'll see.